The lights died mid-toast, and a man hit the floor so hard the music choked. Phones flickered like fireflies. The boathouse groaned under the storm. My father stepped in front of me, a wall the size of 17 years. "You're in my way," I said, voice razor flat. "Move." He did. For the first time in my life, he did. My palms found a sternum. My count hit the silence, and the sea pounded time against the pilings. Somewhere in the dark, someone screamed. Somewhere closer, my father's breath snagged on fear. I drove compressions like I'd been training for this moment since the night he threw me into the rain. When the man's chest jerked and air clawed back into his lungs, the room exhaled. Applause rolled like thunder. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to, because the real shock wasn't the blackout or the body on the floor. It was what the bride was about to tell them, that I had already pulled her back from an edge once before. 17 years earlier, rain hammered our windows like a verdict, and the whole house smelled like wet concrete and Marlboros. My father, Robert Whitfield, to the town just sir inside these walls, didn't sit. He didn't need to. He slid a manila folder across the kitchen table, pages fanned like playing cards, stacked against me law accounting business. Lives he could understand because he could measure them in titles and ties. In my fist, the paper that felt like oxygen acceptance into an air medical training program. I'd memorized the letter the way some kids memorize prayers. I held it out, not begging, just offering proof that I knew who I was supposed to be. He didn't look. "This house isn't raising a sky taxi driver," he said, voice flat enough to split stone. "I'm choosing the sky," I answered, and something old cracked between us. It wasn't loud. It was colder than loud. He opened the front door and let the storm in. "You want to fly? Start by surviving without me." My mother's hands found his sleeve, her voice breaking into pieces. Thunder swallowed her words whole. On the stairs, Matthew 17, loyal, scared, hovered with a face I still carry like a bruise. He wanted to speak. He didn't. In our house, silence was a kind of currency, and he was still paying rent to the man at the door. I gripped the duffel I'd packed like a Dare 2 shirt's worn sneakers, and the letter folded into the side pocket so tight it creased my name. The rain hit like needles. My jacket soaked through in a heartbeat. Behind me, the door slammed with the finality of a judge's gavel, and the echo carved out a room inside my chest where wind and anger could live together. I walked. Every puddle was a line I stepped over. Every streetlight I passed became a mile marker to a life I was building, with nothing but stubbornness for fuel. I promised the dark, a thing I could keep. Every mile I run will be my answer. Those first months were a collage of tired 2 jobs, cheap coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, textbooks with pages that smelled like ink and hope. I learned the intake sounds of a chopper, the way other kids learn family jokes, the whine that rises, the steadying thrum when rotors catch the clean snap, when power and precision shake hands. On ride-alongs, I watched calm people make time obey. I started stitching that calm into my own bones. Some nights, when the air shifted and the world smelled like rain again, I'd remember the slam of that door and the way my name turned into air. I didn't hate him for choosing control over love. Hate would have dragged me backwards. I did something quieter. I let his verdict become my velocity. Then came the storm off the coast, the one that wrote itself into me. The girl on the cliff was shaking so hard I could feel the tremors pulse up the rope. Wind clawed at us like it wanted custody. I pressed my forehead to hers so she could hear me over the world. Breathe with me. Look at me. Inch by inch, we rose. When we hit the deck, my hands were raw, and the gauze I wrapped around her arm went stiff with salt. I kept that strip. I told no one. It wasn't a trophy. It was a compass. Some say I was running from my father. Maybe. But the truth is simpler and more stubborn. I was running toward the person I'd already been the night he said, "Get out." The person who looks at a ledge and chooses rope and grit instead of fear. Years stacked. The letters after my name changed. The paycheck steadied. Once a committee I didn't know handed me a medal I forgot to invite him to see. I wrote the invitation anyway, sealed nothing, and slid it into a wooden box beside a letter from my mother, the one with a line she'd copied in careful looping handwriting. Hope is the thing with feathers. On the worst days, I'd unfold both, then fold them back. They were proof two people can love you in opposite directions, and you can still fly straight. When word drifted north that my father was still my father, opinions heavy as anchors, pride sharp as knives, I shrugged and flew another night. Talk circulated that he'd bragged I couldn't hack a real career to anyone who would listen at the harbor. Some believe he saved his kindest smile for strangers and the coldest one for me. Whispers suggest he kept a spare phone for messages he didn't want traced. I didn't go looking for any of it. Not then. Because life kept happening air that smells like metal and rain sirens chewing up distance, the steady count of compressions in a hummingbird chest, a winch squealing like it's singing. And the quiet moments too, hands around a warm mug at 3 a.m. writing a line in the flight log that only I would ever read. By the time a cream-edged invitation found my kitchen addressed to Whitfield family in gold that glowed like it knew exactly where to hurt, I was 35 and no longer waiting for permission to exist. The fog off Camden rolled in thick gulls, scissored the sky, and the word family stared back until it blurred. My phone buzzed. Don't come. Don't embarrass him. No name, but the shape of the cruelty was familiar. I set it down and let my breath even out. Heat rose, not the kind that burns, the kind that welds. I placed the salt-stiff gauze on the counter, my quiet promise that what I'd built wasn't a phase, it was a spine. I told the empty room the truth I'm going, not for him, for Matthew, and for what Hannah already knows. I folded the invitation into my bag and slid the gauze into a hidden pocket like a secret handshake with the girl on the rope and the woman I became. The mirror by the door caught me in a slant of gray, light hair back. Jaw set, eyes steady. I didn't look brave. I looked busy. Then I locked the apartment and walked into a morning that smelled like rain and decision, the kind New England keeps on tap every fall. 17 years since the door. The harbor moaned its long, low warning, the kind that tells fishermen when to stay in and me when to go. The rehearsal dinner felt staged for a verdict, garlic butter and scallops perfuming the room, gold lights strung across old beams that still smelled like tide. I took a seat in the middle. Safer there, or so I told myself. My father took the head like a ship's captain who believed the harbor owed him calm water. He didn't toast, he baited. Flying in circles all day, he said, swirling his wine. Some of us grew up to do real work. Chairs ticked, forks hovered, my throat stayed loose. I let the quiet work for me. A woman near the end set her napkin down. She flew my husband in when his heart stopped. She said, voice steady as a nurse's hands, "He's here because of her." A murmur moved through the room like a change in current. One of his old firehouse friends leaned forward. "Robert, you of all people know this is service." Color rose along my father's neck. He kept his eyes on me. "Not in this family," he said. "We don't call that a profession." There it was, the smallness dressed as standard. I didn't give him the scene he wanted. I lifted my water-tasted metal and lemon and smiled like someone who'd met storms with less furniture in the way. Under the tablecloth, warm fingers brushed mine. Hannah. Tomorrow she breathed a promise disguised as a whisper. "I'll tell them." His gaze sharpened like a hook, but he let the line play out. He turned to charm someone else. The band pretended nothing had happened. The lights pretended not to flicker. I pretended to, ate 2 bites, laughed. Where laughter made sense, and left early under the excuse of an early flight check. The inn window rattled like a loose memory. I set a wooden box on the desk and lifted the lid. My mother's letter was on top paper, softened at the folds. Hope is the thing with feathers she'd copied her loops, calm and exact. Beneath it, the invitation I'd written and never sent, "Come see me receive a medal." The watermarks were old tears dried into a coastline. I laid the salt-stiff gauze across both a bridge between what saved me and what steadied me. My phone glowed with the message that had knifed my morning, "Don't come. Don't embarrass him." I followed the breadcrumb trail I'd ignored at breakfast, old contact backups, a number tagged years ago when he'd handed me a spare phone for emergencies. The match hit me like a door I'd already heard slam. Some believe he kept that second number to say things he didn't want traced back. Talk circulated that he used it when he needed to be cruel without fingerprints. I didn't need rumors now. I had the screen. I took the shot. Evidence saved. Thread deleted, not to forget, but to choose. Tomorrow would speak louder. Outside, the wind tightened, combing the water into dark ridges. I touched the edges of the metal letter, then slid everything back Mother's hope, my unsent invitation, the gauze that remembered salt and lightning. I closed the lid and felt something settle, not anger, alignment. Sleep came in slices. I dreamed of ropes humming in storm air and a girl's breath syncing with mine. I woke before dawn to a sky the color of pewter and a gull screaming like it had gossip. At breakfast, townspeople said the weather would hold until evening. It's rumored the front's speeding up, someone added. New England doesn't announce its moods, it demonstrates them. I tucked that into a pocket with my phone and a pair of steady hands. By afternoon, the boathouse shone flowers tucked into every corner like apologies. When I walked in conversation bent around me the way wind goes around a stone, I took another middle seat. My father filled his role. Hannah in lace that caught the light moved like someone carrying a secret carefully. She glanced at me once and I knew. The room didn't know it yet, but the story did. We were all waiting for the power to shift. Before we danced, she said, microphone trembling, I need to tell you something. The band quieted. The water slammed the pilings. The storm moved closer. I folded my hands in my lap and leveled my breath. My father watched me instead of her, as if keeping his eyes on the wrong person could keep the truth from happening. Hannah's first words cut clean. 10 years ago, I thought I was going to die. The room stilled. Lace caught the light across her shoulders. The mic shook in her hands, but her voice didn't. A storm pinned me to a cliff face. I couldn't feel my fingers. The ocean was taking me piece by piece. Then a woman lowered herself to me on a rope. She pressed her forehead to mine and said, breathe with me. Look at me. Don't let go. A ripple of recognition ran up my spine like a flare, salt on my tongue, wet rope in my palms, the old strip of gauze sleeping in my pocket like a heartbeat. Hannah's eyes found mine. I didn't. She smiled small and fierce because she didn't. Someone gasped. Someone whispered my name and then swallowed it. She lifted me out of a night that wanted to keep me. She vanished before I could thank her. I kept a note ready for years, signing it H in case I ever found her. Hannah turned toward the room. I found her. She's here. She's my sister-in-law tonight. Chairs scraped back. Mouths opened and forgot to close. The boathouse seemed to lean in to hear her better. Hannah's voice steadied brighter now. Because of her, I learned what courage looks like when no one's clapping. Because of her, Matthew and I started the Coast and Sky Fund training for rescue teams across Maine, 23 programs so far built on her call sign. The double doors at the back swung open. Uniformed rescuers stepped in, boots dark with rain faces lifted toward me like they were saluting a lighthouse. One by one, heads bowed. Then they clapped hands like thunder, rolling in early. Matthew moved to Hannah's side eyes rimmed bright. I asked her to trace the records until we knew for sure, he said. Amara, you were always my sister. This family knows that now. Sound rose cheers, cries, the stuttered applause of people who suddenly remembered breath. I stood because they were standing and because my legs didn't trust the floor to hold me if I didn't. The lights shimmered in the glass. The bay threw back silver. Across the room, my father didn't move. He sat like an anchor face, pale knuckles hard on the table. His mouth tried on a smile and rejected it. For a long moment, he studied his glass as if dignity floated in it, then set it down too carefully. Coincidence, he said, too soft for most to hear, just loud enough for me. Don't make her into something she's not. I could have answered. I didn't. The room had done it for me. The band started a hopeful note and let it hang. Cameras flashed. Someone handed me a small box tied with blue twine inside a pin, etched with wings and a wave, the fund's emblem. I slid it into my palm, its cool edge catching the seam of an old scar no one ever sees. Hannah came to me through the aisle they made for her. When she reached me, she set her forehead to mine for the smallest second, the way I had to hers. Breathe with me. she whispered. The old password returned, not because either of us needed it anymore, but because ritual blesses what history bruised. Applause swelled again. The ceiling lights fluttered, then steadied. Matthew squeezed my shoulder in passing the old stairway, silence between us finally breaking like thin ice. Some say families only rewrite themselves in whispers slowly in kitchens. Tonight it rewrote itself on a microphone in front of everyone who'd ever thought they knew the story. Talk would circulate for years about the moment the bride turned a wedding into a rescue, a different kind from a different edge. I didn't look for my father again. I felt him anyway, a cold front in a warm room gathering weather inside his chest. My phone buzzed against my dress, an alert from the weather center: high winds. Widespread outages expected. The screen's white glow lit my palm for a second, then dimmed. Hannah's hand slid into Matthew's. The band found a song that sounded like sunrise. The rescuers stepped back to the edges of the room, watchful by habit, already clocking exits and distance. I closed my fingers around the pin and caught my reflection in the window, steady, older than 17, younger than regret. Between the glass and the water beyond it, the lights flickered once, twice. The storm pressed a palm to the building and pushed. The lights snapped off mid-laugh, and the room exhaled fear in one sharp sound. A body hit the floor near the head table. The thud swallowed the music. Wind shouldered the boathouse timber, answered with a long, aching creak, and a child started to cry. Phone screens flared like fireflies, too far, too few. I was already moving. Clear the space, I said, steady and loud enough to cut the dark. I need light here. Shoes scraped, chairs shrieked. I dropped to my knees. The collapsed man's face floated in the stutter of screen glow, my father's oldest friend's skin, gone gray around the mouth. A shape filled my light. My father, frozen, blocking the beam. I didn't blink. "You're in my way?" I said, razor flat. "Move." For the first time in 17 years, he did. Two people with lights here and here I called, pointing. "You AED. You call it in and stay on the line. Nurse or EMT with me." A woman knelt opposite, hands already clean in her mind. "I'm a nurse." "Good. Airway. Count with me." My palms found sternum, and memory took the wheel. 30 steady 2 breaths. The room shrank to the size of a chest and a will. The sea outside pounded out a metronome against the pilings. Somewhere to my left, glass rolled and broke. Someone sobbed. Someone prayed like they'd just learned the words. 1, 2, 3. The count lives in the bones when you've done this enough. Sweat slid down my spine despite the cold salt in my mouth that wasn't the ocean anymore. The nurse's breath synced with mine, quick and clean. The man's head lolled. His pulse went quiet under my fingers, and then nowhere. "Where's that AED?" I didn't look up. "I've got it." A teenager voice, shaking, edged in with the red case like it weighed a future. "Good. Open power pads." My hands never left the center of a life. Top right chest, lower left side, clear when it tells you. The unit's voice broke through the panic-analyzing rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." The room held its breath the way water holds a stone. "Shock advised." "Clear," I said, and even the storm seemed to listen. The jolt cracked through the dark and left a taste of metal on the air. The nurse's eyes flashed white in the phone light. "Resume compressions," the machine ordered. I did harder, faster, the beat in my wrists matching the wild percussion of rain. A thought skittered past like a gull. "You are exactly who you said you'd be the night he slammed the door." I didn't let it land. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about rhythm and return. Minutes stretch in places like this. They get long and thin and then snap. Sirens swelled outside, red strobes licking the windows. The paramedics slid through the doors on a gust of wet air, already gloved, already nodding at the count. We became one machine: compressions, bag, rhythm check, clear shock compressions again. The nurse never flinched. My shoulders burned. My spine talked to me in a language of fire. Then the chest rose under my hands with a stubborn little gasp. Another. A cough, rough and rude like a door, kicked back open. The AED's tone changed. So did the room. Sound rushed in tears, a shout applause starting timid and then catching like dry grass. I sat back on my heels, breath-ragged hands shaking in tiny electric aftershocks. The paramedics took over monitor oxygen, the practiced ballet of saving that looks like chaos to anyone who hasn't lived inside it. They loaded him fast, but not hurried. Professional calm has a gravity that pulls everyone safer. I wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist, smearing sweat and salt, and looked up without meaning to. My father stood 3 feet away, rain shining in his hair from the door draft, a crack running straight through the middle of him, where his certainty had been. His eyes were wide in a way I'd only ever seen when lightning finds the ocean. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I didn't need it to, not yet. The generators coughed alive, spitting yellow light across faces that looked like they'd been painted in surprise. The band stood weirdly at attention instruments, useless in their hands. Someone handed me a glass of water and my fingers almost dropped it before they decided to cooperate. The first sip tasted like pennies in air. "Ma'am," one of the paramedics said gently, "you did good." I nodded because words were too big. My hands were already starting to shake like they remembered being human. The boathouse exhaled loud and messy. People hugged in clumps, children were counted by name. Hannah stood on a chair voice steadying the room, telling everyone it would be okay, that power would come back, that the reception would continue once they cleared the wet patches and settled their hearts. Even in crisis, a bride can carry a town. I drifted toward the corridor where the air ran cooler and the floorboards were quieter. The wind fit its knuckles into the seams of the old wood and rattled them like dice. My pulse still kept the compression count, even as the rest of me tried to slow down. I braced my palms on my thighs and breathed until breath felt like a friend again. A shadow slid across the hall, long and familiar. He stopped just out of reach, as if coming closer might set off something he wasn't ready to survive. I didn't turn first. He did. Amara. He said my name shaped like it had weight he'd never noticed until tonight. I straightened. The phone in my pocket rested against my leg, warm the screenshot inside it, bright as a match under a closed door. "Walk with me," I said, and headed for the darker stretch of corridor where the storm couldn't eavesdrop as easily. He followed. The corridor held the damp breath of the bay wood, swelling in the seams, storm fingers drumming the walls. I stopped where the light broke into thin strips and turned. He kept a careful distance like I was a live wire he didn't know how to hold. "You saved him," he said, voice sanded down like the words had fought their way past years of granite. I slid my phone from my pocket and let the screen bloom between us. The screenshot glared, "Don't come. Don't embarrass him." The number at the top was the one he kept for things he didn't want to own. "You didn't just throw me out," I said steady. "You tried to erase me. Even here." His jaw worked. Veins stood like old ropes on the backs of his hands. For a heartbeat, I watched the old fuse flare control grabbing for the wheel. Then something else showed up in his eyes, something I'd never seen on his face unless he thought no one was looking. He swallowed, and the shape of him seemed to shrink. "I don't know how to stand up anymore if I'm not bigger than everybody in the room." His breath dragged. "You came back taller than me, and I don't have a way to be your father in that." Rain ran in silver lines down the window, mapping the ache neither of us could fix with tools we'd used before. "I didn't come back to be smaller," I said. "I came back because Matthew is my brother, because Hannah knows a truth you refuse to see. I won't apologize for who I had to become when you closed that door." Footsteps came soft on wet boards. Matthew appeared face pale with a lifetime of stairway silences. He stood between us without choosing sides, the way people do when they've decided to choose tomorrow instead. "This isn't about who was right 17 years ago," he said, voice firm enough to hold. "It's about who we decide to be in the morning." Behind him, the hall widened into light. Hannah stepped forward, a microphone in her hand, the storm making her veil lift and settle like breath. She pressed the mic into my palm, her fingers' warm eyes asking a question I already knew the answer to. "The students are here," she whispered. "They're listening." We walked back toward the room together, the four of us carrying a history that finally felt lighter than the air outside. The power had found its footing. The generators spread a hum that settled nerves and steadied voices. Clusters of kids in academy jackets stood shoulder to shoulder with rescuers and townspeople, all of them still too awake from what the dark had done. I faced them, the mic cool against my fingers, the strip of salt-stiff gauze a small weight in my pocket. "If someone throws you out a door," I said, letting my voice take the slow way through the room, "remember, doors aren't just for leaving. They're for coming back through when you've built your own wings." A ripple went through the young ones. First high claps, sharp breaths, then the deeper sound of grown hands following after. I saw a kid wipe his eyes with the heel of his palm like he was hiding it from nobody in particular. I saw a firefighter nod, once the kind of nod that says, "heard and filed." I didn't look at my father until the noise thinned to air. When I did, he wasn't staring me down. His eyes had dropped not in contempt but in surrender. Not defeated. Different. Learning how to exist at the same height as other people. Hannah squeezed my arm as she passed shepherding people back toward warmth and food and a future. Matthew pulled me into a hug that knocked the wind out of years we hadn't said out loud. "You were always my sister," he said into my hair. Always. The paramedic who'd taken over earlier found me near the doorway and touched the brim of his cap. "He's en route and stable," he said. "You gave him back the minutes that matter." I nodded and thanked him, and when I turned, my father was closer than before, close enough that I could see the salt in his eyebrows, the fatigue around his mouth, the seam where pride had been stitched so tight it finally popped. "I can't fix that text," he said, barely audible over the generator. "I can only say I sent it, and it was small, and I'm—" The word broke, once then found itself. "Sorry, I didn't hand him absolution. I handed him clarity." "You don't get to keep a spare phone for cruelty anymore," I said. "You want a place in my life, it happens in daylight." His nod was small but real, like a man testing a muscle that never got used. We stood in a truce made of wet wood and tired hearts, while the room behind us reset itself. Tables, righted candles, relit laughter, wobbly, and then truer. The storm still pressed its head against the glass, but the building had remembered how to breathe. A coordinator tapped the mic stand, ready to reroute the night. I handed the microphone back lighter than when it reached me. Hannah squeezed my hand once more and went to thank the guests, to point them to hot food, to raise a toast to second chances without naming them. I stepped out into the corridor again for a slice of quiet. The air tasted like tin and fresh beginnings. My phone buzzed with a handful of messages I ignored. The one I waited for had not arrived. Yet. Some say change happens like sunrise. Slow then, all at once. Out on the water, the wind shifted just enough to move a curtain of rain sideways, opening a thin seam of clearer dark beyond it. I slipped the gauze from my pocket and turned it in my fingers. Not a trophy. Not anymore. A witness. Behind me, music found its key again. Ahead of me, the night smelled like tomorrow. Morning came in silver. The bay wore a skin of fog, thin enough to see the working boats ghost along the channel. Gulls cut the air like paper darts. I ran a palm over the life flight's nose, felt cold metal wake under my hand, and climbed in. Switches found their homes. The rotors gathered the sky and gave it back as a steady thrum. Rockport slipped small beneath me, rooflines like folded envelopes, docks like ribs. The pier where my father had spent half his life telling water what to do unraveled into a thin line and then a dot. I leveled out the altimeter, holding true the horizon, a pencil mark I could trust. My phone strapped to the dash like an obedient star lit. A number I knew without looking. His main line. No spare phone, no shadow. If you want, meet me at the pier. No past, just learning how to stand beside each other. I let the message breathe. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't. Because the girl with the duffel and the woman at the rope both deserved a choice that wasn't rushed by weather or applause. The helicopter hummed like a heartbeat I could set my own to. Sunlight threaded through the clouds and flashed across the windshield, a slow blink. In my pocket, the salt-stiff gauze pressed a small, honest weight against my thigh. In my head, my mother's line floated up the way it always does when the air feels thin. Hope is the thing with feathers, not a promise, a direction. Below the town began to move coffee steam curling from doors, fishermen hefting the morning on their backs, a boy on a bike racing his shadow along the harbor road. Somewhere under all that, Hannah and Matthew would be waking to a day that would never tell the story the same way again. Somewhere near the waterline, my father would be standing taller than last night, not because height changed, but because pride finally loosened its boots. I thought about the unsent invitation still sleeping in the wooden box, about the medal I didn't ask him to see, and the mic I didn't ask to hold. I thought about the corridor where I handed him his own words, and he couldn't carry them anymore. None of it added up to forgiveness on command. It added up to room, and sometimes room is the first mercy either of you can manage. The radio crackled, routine, friendly, alive. I made a wide pass over the point, the water wrinkling under our shadow like a waking eye. The pier drew its thin line again. I could picture him there already, jaw softer, shoulders, learning a new math. Maybe he'd have 2 coffees, one going cold. Maybe he'd stare at the place where the storm broke and the lights died and still think the worst thing that ever happened was the moment I told him to move and then watched him do it. I touched the phone and let the screen go dark. The choice wasn't yes or no. It was not yet. I would land when I was ready in daylight with both feet under me and no spare numbers left between us. Hold your altitude, I told myself, quiet into the rotor wash, and the machine obeyed. The bay opened like a palm. My shadow stitched itself to the water, long and sure, and for a breath, the outline of the aircraft and the outline of my body fused into one dark shape moving forward. Behind me, a door that once slammed had learned a new trick. It could stay open without swallowing me whole. Ahead of me, the air was clear enough to measure. Between them, a woman flew the line she'd drawn for herself. I banked toward the hospital pad, the city lights thinning into morning. The smell of fuel and salt and metal braided into something that felt like peace. When the skids kissed the paint, it was soft, certain. I cut power and let the world grow audible. Again, gulls heckling Coast Road, humming a laugh from someone I couldn't see. I sat for a moment longer with my hands light on my knees and the gauze warm in my pocket, then climbed down into the day I'd made. I didn't text him back. Not that hour, not that minute. I put the phone away and walked toward the next call, the next person whose world would tilt and need steady hands. Because this is what I know: you can build wings out of the same weather that tried to drown you. And once you've done that, you get to choose which doors you use and when. If your family ever wrote you out of your own story, what did you do next? Tell me below. If this hit home, like the video and subscribe. Your story might be the one someone needs to hear to keep going.